It's true to say that Bloody Sunday is an iconic event in the history of the city and in the history of relations on the island and between Ireland and Britain. The painting, the 30th of January, I think I would like to see as an act of solidarity from a Dubliner, as Declan says, one of Ireland's most renowned artists. And having now seen it, the painting for the first time, I've recognised a number of figures who could also be described as iconic, being Father Edward Daly and Hugh McMonigal, both of now, as you know, have passed. But I think it is very, very proper that those two figures who acted with great bravery on the day of Bloody Sunday are now featured in Robert's art piece. So I would just like to say thank you very, very much to Robert for taking this on, for making this contribution to the history of the city and the 50th commemorations. And I'd also like to thank the City and District Council for facilitating the whole process. So, Gura Mila Mahagov.
Thank you very much, Tony. I think we would all share your hopes for the future. On reflecting on meeting Robert again and this event tonight, I remembered that it was in 1979 when I first worked with Robert Ballagh, when we did an exhibition in the Orchard Gallery based on a series of paintings on political themes. And political themes have been a constant in Robert's work over the years. And over the years, he and I have participated in many, many debates about the role of the arts, the role of the artist, particularly in relation to social and political circumstances and situations. But Robert is one of those artists who engages with those sorts of issues directly. And there can be no debate about Robert's consistent and sustained commitment to social justice, to equality, to human and civil rights issues on this island and elsewhere. And we should remember that the march on the 30th of January 1972 was actually a civil rights march. Robert has pursued these concerns as an artist since he came to the fore in Ireland in the 1960s, but also as a citizen. And one could say that as a citizen artist, he's participated in many, many campaigns around these sorts of issues, because citizenship means participation. It means not standing apart from society or apart as an artist, apart from social issues, no matter how difficult they may be. And Robert has always fulfilled that responsibility, it seems to me, as a citizen artist. It's interesting that in his earliest works, he often deployed imagery absorbed from art history. And it's very clear, as Tony has said, he used the word iconic, and the image of Father Daly and the men with Jackie Duddy's body on Bloody Sunday is an absolutely iconic image that has resonated over the years. And what Robert has provided in this painting is an icon of that moment, that historical moment, which is still being negotiated. And I would now ask Robert to talk to us about his work and this painting in particular.
Thank you, Declan. Well, it's a long, long time since I was standing here inside the Guildhall. Believe it or not, in the early 1960s, I was in a show band, and we used to play regularly at dances here in the Guildhall. Can I say at this time, it's great to be back. To my mind, the 13th of August 1969 is a truly significant date in recent Irish history. Let me explain. On that date, sectarian gangs, aided and abetted by the police, made violent incursions into nationalist neighbourhoods, burning houses and driving people from their homes. The response was immediate. Widespread rioting broke out, and the British government took the precarious decision to deploy troops on the streets of the north. At the time, the British Home Secretary James Callaghan ruefully observed, "It was easy to send them in, but it would be much more difficult to get them out." On the other hand, the Irish government was caught completely unawares, successive governments having ignored the north for decades. Initially, the Irish government set up field hospitals and a few refugee camps to help those fleeing the conflict. A relief fund was established to alleviate the distress, and a covert plan was agreed to import arms to be made available to northern nationalists in the event of a repeat of the sectarian attacks of the 13th of August. When the plan was rumbled, leading members of the government, including the Taoiseach Jack Lynch, denied all knowledge and scapegoated ministers C.J. Haughey and Neil Blaney, who were summarily dismissed from their posts. 2 arms trials followed, which resulted in all defendants being found not guilty. The official reaction in the South to the unfolding violence in the North left many nationalists feeling that, in the future, they would be on their own. In the visual arts, a response to the violence was triggered by a surprising intervention by the artist Michael Farrell. In September 1969, the most important annual display of contemporary painting, the Irish Exhibition of Living Art, was due to open in Cork and then travel to Belfast. At the opening in Cork, on receiving his prize for the best painting in the exhibition, Michael declared that he was giving his prize money to the Northern Refugee Fund and that he was withdrawing his picture from the exhibition in Belfast. Obviously, Michael's pronouncement provoked serious consideration by the rest of the artists in the exhibition. I was one of those artists and had been awarded second prize for a painting entitled Marchers. It was from a series inspired by the civil rights marches in America and the civil rights campaign in the North. Eventually, 10 artists, including myself, decided to follow Michael's example and withdraw from the exhibition in Belfast. Sometime later, Michael informed me that he was planning to stage an exhibition of the withdrawn works in Dublin, and that he had secured a venue in Kildare Street, opposite Leinster House, that was the headquarters for an organisation called the Citizens Committee. I later learned that it had received funding and support from the Irish government's Northern Relief Fund. I agreed to help hang the exhibition, but when I arrived at 43 Kildare Street, I discovered that there was a scarcity of equipment. Someone suggested that I try the basement. Unfortunately, there were no tools, only, nestling in the shadows, several large wooden crates. This discovery instantly provoked a panic attack, because at the time, the air was thick with rumours of guns being smuggled north. Subsequently, I learned that the crates contained not guns, but radio equipment, which eventually helped set up Radio Free Belfast and Radio Free Derry. The opening of the exhibition was performed by Paddy Devlin, who later went on to become one of the founders of the SDLP. This is a photograph from the Irish press, which shows Michael Farrell, myself, and Gerard Dillon, the artist who was originally born on the Falls Road in Belfast. Michael asked me to design an exhibition poster featuring one of his paintings. This is the poster. Soon afterwards, however, I found myself faced with an awkward dilemma. I was invited to take part in an exhibition organised by the Arts Councils of Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and Northern Ireland. And since the final venue for the exhibition was Belfast, I had to decide whether I should continue my boycott or perhaps try to make some relevant imagery. I opted for the latter. This was the name of the exhibition, Celtic Triangle. That was the easy part. The difficult part was what to do. I resorted to art history and scrutinised those artists who had responded to similar circumstances in their own time. The first picture that stood out by a mile was the 3rd of May by Francisco Goya. In this painting, Goya depicts an actual event in Madrid when occupying French soldiers executed Spanish patriots. Since I was acutely aware that I couldn't possibly improve on Goya's masterpiece, I decided to refrain from interfering with his superb composition and instead to simply paint it in a contemporary style, which would hopefully bring it to the attention of a wider audience. I did the same with Rape of the Sabine Women by Jacques-Louis David, which was his response to the internecine violence which occurred in the aftermath of the French Revolution. Eugene Delacroix also addressed the phenomenon that was the French Revolution with his painting, Liberty Leading the People. I have to say I was disappointed by most reviews of my work in the exhibition as it toured Edinburgh, Cardiff and Dublin. Most critics dismissed my efforts as hollow mockery of great art, and certainly none were prepared to acknowledge my desire to link art to the unfolding conflict in the north. When the exhibition arrived in Belfast, I hoped that at last someone might recognise the political content of the work. In those days, the Arts Council of Northern Ireland had a gallery on Bedford Street in Belfast with the equivalent of a shop window. The exhibition officer, Brian Ferrin, decided to hang Liberty in the window. After the exhibition closed, I called Brian to ask if there had been any public reaction. He told me that they had received just one complaint. It was from a DUP councillor. He was unhappy with the naked breasts on display. I have to admit that I was frustrated by the failure of many people to take on board what I was trying to say. So sometime later, I decided to paint a picture that would make my intentions clear. I called it My Studio 1969. The year 1971 saw the introduction of internment without trial by the Stormont government. This proved to be a disastrous intervention, as its implementation was largely one-sided and consequently led to widespread civil unrest with demonstrations, rallies, and protest marches. One such march was organised for the 30th of January 1972 in Derry. The decision by the British authorities to deploy the parachute regiment on the day proved calamitous. As we know, 13 innocent civilians were shot dead. When news of the outrage spread, I recall the mood of the people becoming convulsed with rage at what had happened. When a march to the British Embassy in Dublin was announced, my wife Betty, together with our daughter Rachel, who was only 3 at the time, and myself decided to make common cause with the protesters. I clearly remember the anger of the crowd as it moved through the city. Anything that could be identified as English was not safe. I remember hearing the shattering of plate glass windows as we passed the offices of British Airways at the bottom of Grafton Street. When the march reached Merrion Square, it joined a large crowd that had already assembled in front of the embassy. It seemed to me that the mood of the crowd had shifted from anger to a hunger for vengeance. Initially, stones and other objects began to fly in the direction of the embassy. Next, it was glass bottles, but before long, these had morphed into petrol bombs. At that stage, I suggested to my wife that we quit the scene, since being responsible for a 3-year-old in a possible riot situation was not ideal. Later, we learned that we had missed the final conflagration, but also, thankfully, the violent chaos of a police baton charge that left many wounded in its wake. Later that year, the Irish Exhibition of Living Art took place in the Project Art Centre in Dublin, and several artists exhibited work that was provoked by Bloody Sunday. In it, I chalk-marked on the gallery floor the outlines of 13 bodies and then poured blood, which I had obtained from a friend who worked in the Dublin abattoir, over each victim. Later, as part of the same exhibition, the artist and writer Brian O'Doherty, who was based in New York, staged a performance where he changed his name as an artist to Patrick Ireland in protest over the events of Bloody Sunday. And after the whitewash by Lord Widgery, the poet Thomas Kinsella composed a truly powerful poem, Butcher's Dozen, and Brian Friel responded to Bloody Sunday with his play, Freedom of the City, which was set in the Guildhall here in Derry. Not long ago, some young people from the Pilots Row Community Centre here in Derry approached me to request permission to create a mural based on my painting, The 3rd of May after Goya, to mark the anniversary of Bloody Sunday. Naturally, I told them to go ahead. Finally, on completion, when they asked me to unveil the mural in Glenfadda Park, I did so on a cold, wet January afternoon. I was unaware at the time that this experience had planted a small seed in my subconscious, which only germinated as the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday approached. As I began to feel a compulsion to create a new picture, the approach taken by the young people from Pilate's Row determined my response. Once again, Goya's example became crucial. In his painting, the central cluster of victims demands your full attention. Consequently, I decided to replace them with the iconic image of Father Edward Daly with those carrying the body of Jackie Duddy. The soldiers in Goya's firing squad are French soldiers on Spanish soil shooting Spanish people, whereas in my picture, the soldiers are obviously British paratroopers on Irish soil shooting Irish people. Another artist who influenced my approach is Picasso. His painting Guernica, created in response to the Nazi bombing of the Basque town of the same name, has always fascinated me, and it was the monochrome nature of his composition that I adopted for my picture, except that I allowed myself one extra colour, red, to represent the blood spilt on Bloody Sunday. In order to remind people that the march on the 30th of January was an anti-internment march, I decided to include a broken placard inscribed "End Internment." In my painting, I wanted to point out that even though the Savile inquiry accepted that all of the victims were unarmed and above all innocent, so far no one has been proven guilty of any crime. Hence the inclusion of this statement by Major General Robert Ford. A long time ago, I received an invitation to speak at a rally in Guildhall Square after the Bloody Sunday 21st anniversary march. At the time, I was both humbled and terrified, as I'd rarely spoken in public before. Consequently, I took the invitation seriously and invested considerable effort in preparing what to say. On the day, a cold, rainy one, I managed to get through the speech and as a result was relatively pleased with myself. That night I stayed with a local family, and the following morning, as I tucked into an Ulster fry, we were joined by two young family members. The boy asked, "What did you think of yesterday?" The girl replied, "Brilliant. Except for that fella from Dublin, he just went on and on and on." So bearing in mind that particular admonition, I will tax your patience no further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Just to say that the painting 30th of January will be on display in the Guildhall under the normal opening hours of the Guildhall until the end of June this year. It may be 50 years since Bloody Sunday, but the pain of the families and what Bloody Sunday means for all of us are ongoing issues in the present tense. That's why it's so important that these issues are addressed culturally as well as politically. And I would like to thank Robert for being part of that process. I want to thank the organisers of this event, the team from the District Council. I want to thank Tony for speaking and the Mayor, and also you for attending this evening. Thank you.